All right, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for the sixth edition of the Fireside Chat. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. For those of you who are new to the series, the Fireside Chat is a conversational webinar where we connect with some of the top professionals in the running industry. This week, we have Jill Merkel, who is a sports and women's wellness dietitian in Nashville, Tennessee. Before we get started, let me cover a few housekeeping items. First, do me a favor, silence any technology around you. We have a lot of great content in this presentation today and tons of questions I want to get to as well. So I really want to make sure you get the most from that. Second, I highly recommend asking questions on top of the questions that we already have. Of course, there'll be specific things that we will cover during this chat as was outlined in the registration, but you are more than welcome to ask anything as we go through to get your questions answered in relation to nutrition and running. At any point, you'll see a chat box on the screen, top or bottom, depending on how you're viewing the webinar today. So feel free to click that and add a question in there if you haven't already. Lastly, if you cannot stay for the entire chat for whatever reason, or you just want to reflect back on this content at a later time, I will be sending the replay of this to you tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So make sure you check your email and especially the spam folder since it can sometimes end up in there. So without further ado, Jill, thank you for joining us once again on the Fireside Chat. How's everything going down your way in Nashville today?
Thank you. Happy to be here. It's going well. It's a little bit of a cloudy, rainy kind of day here in Nashville. So, what can you do about that? But just making the most of things down here in the new year.
And I've heard you guys have had a little snow lately to shut schools down and everything, right?
Yeah, it cracks me up since all the places that I've lived, that gets a lot more snow and things continue as usual. That yeah, we had like a dusting of snow and school was closed for a couple of days.
I miss those times, All right, so to get us started here, do me a favor and do us a favor. Let us know a little bit about you, maybe in 60 seconds, your background, your experiences, where you're from, and kind of what led you up to this point today.
Sure. So I'm a registered dietitian in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm in private practice here and consulting. So I've been here a little over 4 years and really working with clients, sports nutrition, athletes and active individuals, helping them fuel their body properly for their sport and for their exercise. And then also I work with a lot of women in particular who struggle with disordered eating, chronic dieting, body image issues. So I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor. So I incorporate those principles into the counseling with those individual clients. Currently, I'm running a group for intuitive eating. And so that's always fun to have people come together and share their real life experiences with, the struggles that they're having and how intuitive eating has helped them.
Awesome. So, and are you still working with the Tennessee Titans?
I am. Yeah, we're on break right now since unfortunately we lost in the first round of the playoffs. But yeah, still with them. Just finished up my 4th season working with them.
Surprised you left that out. I mean, it's pretty cool, I think. All right, so to get us started into the content today, tell us a little bit about sustainable nutrition goals. I know a lot of people into this restrictive mindset of I need to, in order to lose weight, in order to do this, I need to remove things from my diet. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. It's, the new year just happened. And so this is a big time that there's a lot of restrictive diets, a lot of, pushing for diets, pushing for people to make big changes, the whole new year, new you mentality. And we just know from experience that that doesn't work. We tend to overestimate what we can do in a very short amount of time. Rather than looking at the big picture, looking at where do we want to be a year from now, rather than, just doing a whole 30 and trying to make it through 30 days of really restrict diet rules. And so I think that's important to discuss is a lot of these restrictive kind of fad diets, they have a lot of rules. It tells you these foods are good, these foods are bad. You can only eat these foods, don't eat these foods. And that can cause a lot of like obsession around food, kind of like when you tell a kid not to do something, not to touch something, not to eat something, like we want it more because now this thing is, off limits. And so that can actually lead to food rebellion, where we end up overeating that food once we do finally give in to that craving, or, we're just rebelling against ourselves or against maybe a loved one that pushed us to start this diet. We're like, you told me not to eat this food. I'm going to eat, this whole thing just to prove you wrong. Like I can't eat this food. And so I see that happen a lot. And a big reason is, again, because of the food rules, but also most of them are just not realistic in terms of the amount of calories, the amount of food variety. If we're just supposed to eat grilled chicken breast, broccoli, and brown rice for every meal, like that gets pretty boring. And so, to that low calorie, like for women in particular, the 1,200 calories for whatever reason tends to be a go-to number. And that's the amount of calories that like a 4 or 5-year-old needs. And so it's just completely understandable that we can't stick to that. Yet we tend to blame ourselves. We think if we just had more willpower, if we just stuck with it longer, but really the body, which we'll see in the next slide, the body really rebels against not getting enough nutrition. And so, yeah, that's why these restrictive diets don't work, is because the body adapts to it. And so it affects our metabolism. The metabolism slows down to conserve the energy that it does have and that it is getting. The appetite increases at the same time. So that's where we get a lot of those food cravings, especially for high carb, high fat foods, because the body's looking for some quick energy. And so when people are like, oh, I feel addicted to sugar, or I have, such strong sugar cravings, that's a big sign that we're probably not eating enough, because that's the fastest energy source for the body. And if we're not eating enough, the body is going to increase those cravings to try and get us to give it the energy that it's looking for. And then at the same time, the desire for movement decreases, because if you're not eating enough just to keep everything working properly, it's certainly not going to sound like a good idea to go out on a 2-hour run or to do a really intense workout, because again, the body is trying to preserve the energy that it does have. And so this makes sense from a historical standpoint, trying to stay alive. The body's number one goal is to stay alive. But today, when for most of us, food is very prevalent and easily accessible, it just means that when we try and eat less, we just become more obsessed with food. We have those cravings. We think about food. We're worried about food. If we're going to go to like a social event, maybe pre-COVID or after COVID, we worry about what foods are going to be available if we're trying to follow this restrict, these foods are the only foods that I can eat.
Right. And so what are your typical recommendations on getting past this of restrictive eating, restrictive dieting? How do people move forward with the right mindset?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First, we usually need to eat more. If we're not eating enough, that's one of the first things, is we need to eat more in order to make sure that we're fueling our body properly, fueling our brain properly, making sure we're getting enough nutrition to support our exercise and our goals. And then really breaking down the goals, not being so intense for like a short amount of time to the point where we can't stick with it. And so then we give up and we do nothing for the rest of the year, right? Like January, everybody's trying to hit these goals really hard and then kind of fall off the wagon and start again the next January. Versus if we break them down and really make them small, realistic, obtainable goals, something that we can stick to long term. Again, looking at the big picture, where do I want to be a year from now, not just 30 days from now? And so I really encourage you to, start by assessing what you're doing currently, being really honest and really realistic about what are my current habits and what's one thing I can do this week or today to build some new habits, to add something in. I think that's really important, to focus on what can we add in, what can we do more of, rather than like the restrictive diets of, taking things away and trying to stay away from certain things.
Okay. And so you said a couple times about addition, abundance, sometimes adding more things in to prevent those cravings. What are some of the key things that you recommend specifically adding into a diet rather than taking away?
Yeah, there's so many things. And that's why I think it's very individualized, as everything with nutrition is, but looking at, again, what we're doing currently and where we can make some positive changes. So for some people, it might be hydration. Maybe we're only drinking like 25 ounces of water a day. And so we want to start to increase that. And again, rather than trying to go from like 25 ounces to 100 ounces, maybe we can try and add 5 or 10 ounces a day and just start to build up versus that all or nothing mentality. And then also, I think looking at the different food groups, looking at fruits and vegetables, how many am I consuming? Is there a way I can add in one more? Maybe it's protein, maybe it's a certain meal, such as breakfast. Maybe I want to focus on making breakfast a more complete meal this week. It could be pre or post workout nutrition. What am I eating, drinking before, during, and after? Is there something I can do differently there in order to really maximize the benefit of that workout? And then other things too, not nutrition related specifically, but movement. Maybe we've gotten off track with our exercise goals and we want to just start to incorporate more movement throughout the day, or look at our sleep habits or self-care, or adding in fun and joy, things that like bring us joy, kind of looking at the whole picture, rather than, I feel like we get so focused on trying to follow a specific diet and trying to exercise perfectly, but there's so much more that goes into someone's overall health.
Mhm. And so I know everyone is so different, but if you had to kind of round up all of the nutrition clients that you've worked with over the years, are there particular areas here that you can say these tend to be the ones that are the most deficient or the most neglected? Just kind of what, based on what we think with our modern nutrition thought process?
Yeah, I think oftentimes I have my clients, like, hydration is kind of an easy one to start with if someone's not consuming enough fluids. But then, yeah, we do either focus on a certain food group or a certain meal or snack. And so then it's looking at, is this a quality issue? Is this a quantity issue? Like, are we trying to just get something at breakfast since we're not, right now consuming breakfast? Or is our breakfast just a granola bar and we're trying to make it a little more balanced? So focusing on one specific thing, I think, can be really helpful.
Okay, awesome. And I think obviously hydration and kind of where we'll go here in a second. This time of year, I feel like that as the temperature drops and we're not as concerned with getting fluids in, and people kind of get into more of a deficiency with hydration. What are some of the three, like the different things that you'd like to consider and recommend for proper hydration with running, with everyday activity?
Yeah. General rule of thumb for hydration is to try and get half of your body weight in ounces of fluid per day. And I have seen that come up a lot with my clients right now in the winter, is like, oh, I just don't feel like drinking water. Like, cold water doesn't sound good. So then, getting creative. Do you want like hot water with lemon? Do you want to do some hot tea? Like, are there some warm beverages we can incorporate? Because yeah, we still need to be hydrated even in the winter when we're not maybe sweating as much as we are during the summer. But really, the three things to look at for hydration is definitely fluids, drinking water, drinking enough throughout the day. For exercise, if it's going to be like an hour or less, or if it's going to be a pretty low intensity workout, usually water is going to be enough. So again, it's very individualized if someone's a heavy sweater or a salty sweater, but in general, an hour or less, we can usually just get by with water. It's when we're looking at longer than an hour, or a really intense workout, or a really like hot and humid day where we're going to be sweating more. That's when we need to start to consider electrolytes, and then also fueling from a carbohydrate standpoint. And so these are just a couple of products that are available. There's tons of products out there now for fueling and for hydration. But thinking about, okay, if I'm, maybe going to work out for 60 minutes today and it's really hot and humid, I'm going to maybe put an electrolyte tablet in my water in order to make sure that I'm getting enough electrolytes, but I don't necessarily need the fuel right now. Now, if we're looking at maybe a 2-hour workout, more of a moderate temperature day, we don't necessarily need a ton of electrolytes. There, we might look at water and a fueling source like some of these energy gels, because those are going to give you fuel from the carbs, but also electrolytes. So a lot of the products have a mixture of both, but it's just important to note, like if you're using like the noon tablets, to know that those don't have a lot of fuel. So you can't use that as both. And so just being aware of what the products provide for you and what you need during that workout.
So when you say electrolytes, what kinds of things are you talking about specifically? And are there any ways we can get those same electrolytes without some of these products, just from a nutritional standpoint, like preparing for our run with this kind of food will provide the electrolytes to not cramp or not be dehydrated?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. So the main electrolytes we're looking at is sodium and potassium, mostly sodium. And so that's where the products do work out well because they have, the right amount. They have higher sodium, they have some potassium, they've got some of the other electrolytes that we lose in smaller amounts. You can certainly, start to incorporate more like salty foods if you're going to need more electrolytes, but you don't want to use a product. Having some salty foods like pretzels or goldfish crackers or some kind of soup can help to kind of store that up to help you maintain the fluids before workout. And then also you can certainly use whole food sources for fueling. It just creates a little bit more of maybe some strategic planning of what foods am I going to use? How am I going to carry them? If I'm trying to carry a bunch of bananas rather than putting some gels, in a little pouch, it gets a little bit more complicated. And then it's definitely based on, personal preference, taste wise, texture wise, if you're using like the gels or you're using like the chews or a powder or a fluid, and then what you can handle. Some people from a GI standpoint handle certain products better than others.
Okay. So immediately post run, are there certain recommendations you would make in terms of hydration? I know it sounds like the intensity and the duration of that run really matter. But are there any other specific things that maybe are important?
Yeah, so if someone, again, is a heavy sweater or a salty sweater, trying to replace the fluids and also the electrolytes. So kind of same thing, incorporating some more salty foods, some more foods that have fluids like fruits and vegetables or soups or smoothies to try and replenish both of those things.
Okay. And from a hydration standpoint, people always ask this, like I'm doing a 6-week Run Strong challenge right now. We have, hey, consume half of your body weight in ounces of water. And we always get that question, okay, water is in coffee, water is in tea. Where do you draw the line? Like, okay, this is a good hydration source versus maybe this is something we should stay away from, but still contains plenty of water in it. Is there certain differences there?
Yeah, so usually I try and say like anything that doesn't have calories. So not necessarily thinking of like sweet tea, that's got a lot of extra sugar, got some extra calories. Maybe we don't count that as towards our hydration to like encourage that extra consumption. Also from a caffeine or a coffee standpoint, it used to be thought that dehydrated us. And so that's why caffeine beverages didn't count towards our hydration. So there's still now some, like that's been kind of debunked. It doesn't really dehydrate us. But there's still some rules around like maybe you can just count your first 8 ounces of coffee and the rest, should be more water or non-caloric beverages. So, I mean, I'm not huge on like really strict rules. So I say, again, looking at what you're doing currently, if you're only drinking maybe 20 ounces of plain water throughout the day and everything else is coffee or sweetened beverages or whatever it might be, then maybe we'll try and shift one of those to try and get more just basic fluids. But yeah, it's always changing.
And I can imagine the individual needs of each person are so different too. Some people start like, they're really not doing well here. So even consuming more coffee throughout the day might be a bonus versus someone that does better, but they need to train for an Ironman or what have you. So when it comes to dietary changes, what things that people need to take into consideration and if regarding the demands of their training? So either total duration, intensity, preparing for some kind of upcoming spring goal race, whether it's a run or a triathlon or what have you.
Yeah, so I like these plates from the US Olympic Committee. These are called the athletes plates, and there's 3 of them that we'll look at here. So these are just a good overview of looking at again, the 4 food groups: carbs, protein, fat, and produce. And then looking at kind of a visual representation of how your needs change based on your training. So again, it's always very individualized. People are like, just tell me what to do. And I'm like, there's no one answer that fits everyone. But starting out, for an easy training, we go up to moderate and hard training. You see that on this plate, the carbohydrates or the whole grains section there is about a fourth of the plate, maybe a little bit less if you're in your off season trying to make some body composition changes. We've still got fourth of the plate lean protein, maybe a half of the plate, those colorful fruits and vegetables, getting some of those healthy fats. And then you'll see on the next slide that it starts to increase those carbohydrates. So the main thing that changes with training is that the more active we are, the more fuel we need, which we get from those carbohydrate-based foods. So this middle plate is a good starting point for most people. If you're just trying to figure out where you're at, with your current intake, with your current food groups and portion sizes, I'll usually start with this plate because it's a pretty good balance of maybe a half or maybe a fourth of your plate is still protein, maybe a third of your plate is those grain-based foods, third of the plate vegetables, and then still getting those healthy fats over on the side. And then we can modify up or down, from this middle plate. And then you'll see on the next slide with the hard training or maybe leading up to, a long distance race, again, it's those carb-based foods that are going to increase. So maybe now we've gone from a fourth of the plate to a third to now a half of our plate is those carb-based foods, because again, that's the main fuel source for your muscles, for your brain. And so, it's like going on a long distance car ride. Like if we go long enough, we need to refuel. And so carbs is going to be our main fuel source for those longer distance or more intense workout sessions.
So obviously with this, from the easy to hard training, carbs have increased significantly, but you still at the same point hear them demonized that we need to lose weight. I need to cut carbs or follow this low carb diet. Obviously from an endurance standpoint, that needs to be the majority of your calories to actually be successful as a runner or a triathlete or what have you, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Carbs get a bad rap. And I think that happens for a couple of reasons. One is that there's a lot of carb-based foods. So, when we're talking about protein, it's pretty much like eggs, fish, meat, like here's your protein foods, but the carb list is like never ending. It's a lot of our snack foods, a lot of our dessert foods. And so just the fact that there is a lot more foods in that category means that we tend to eat more of those foods. And then also portion sizes when we're eating out, especially. Like I think about if you go to like an Italian restaurant and you get, some kind of pasta dish, the whole plate is pasta. And then maybe you've got carbs on the side, like breadsticks. And so you're consuming even way more than you need on a hard training day. So I think it's the portion sizes. It's not that we need to go to the extreme of no carbs or super low carbs, but just making room for some of the other food groups on our plate.
Right. And okay, so a question here that I want to kind of add in at this point. As you increase your training, this is almost specifically how your macros should change. Is there a certain proportion that is a kind of a good range for most people? Like this is where you should fall in, or a recommendation they should just think about?
In terms of like grams of macros?
Yeah, this question was, how should macros change and what should max calorie be while upping training time? I know person specific, but is there anything just to consider with that?
Yeah, it is going to be very individualized, just how many calories total that they need. But that's where I do like to start just with that moderate training plate and focus on, getting the different food groups. I think in particular, protein is one that most people struggle to get enough of, especially earlier in the day, especially at breakfast. And so looking at, again, how many food groups are at each meal, at each plate, taking into consideration snacks. Because a lot of times people are surprised, even if they come to me for sports nutrition and they have a goal of, changing some body composition, trying to get a little bit leaner. I usually encourage them to eat more. And they're like, wait, I'm trying to, lose weight or lose body fat. You want me to eat more? I'm like, yes, because we want to make sure we're getting a certain amount of protein, getting those healthy fats that help with recovery, getting those fruits and vegetables, getting the carbs. And so that we're getting all the nutrients that we need, but focusing more on like the quality of food, not just, counting calories where you could have, 1,200 calories a day out of Oreos and then be like, well, I ate my 1,200 calories, but that wasn't very nutrient balanced, so looking at the quality of food that we're getting.
If they're the vanilla double stuffed kind of Oreos, are those okay though? Those are my favorite. So Carol asked how to not put on weight during training. I've been told I don't eat enough. So what happens in terms of body weight, body mass, body fat, whatever, however you want to look at it, from either being in a deficit in terms of calories or being in abundance, I guess, or overestimating that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen. One thing to consider again is when we're trying to eat less than we actually need, usually that leads to periods of overeating. So whether that looks like someone's trying to eat quote unquote clean, Monday through Friday, and then they kind of splurge on the weekends and they don't realize how much they're actually consuming on the weekends, both because, they've let their guard down, they're not following their strict rules anymore, but also because the body is like, woo, like we're making up for the week not getting enough. And then also too, I think a lot of times we can sometimes overestimate how many calories we've maybe burned during a workout, especially like a long workout. If we're doing a long run on Saturday or Sunday, and then it's kind of a free for all in terms of food afterwards, because we think, oh, we burned X amount of calories, so now I can eat, excuse me, everything that I want to eat. So again, finding that balance of we do absolutely need to try and match our intake to our output as much as possible. And we do need nutrition in order to see the benefits of the workout, because we need the carbs and the protein and the hydration, for recovery afterwards. But maybe we don't need, to just kind of go on a binge for the rest of the day after a long workout.
Mm-hmm. And so from obviously in the endurance community specifically, one thing I see is poor nutrition or poor fueling and bone stress injuries specifically. Do you see a lot of that in terms of people not fueling properly and then like certain injuries and things they'll run into because they were just not matching the demands and how much they were exerting themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, one of the main reasons to focus on nutrition is a lot of times we're very focused on right now, like, okay, I am eating, say, 1,400 calories, something that's too low for me, but I feel okay right now. But we're not, again, looking at the big picture. What's going to happen a month from now or 6 months from now or a year from now if we continue this, because the body's going to continue to break down and not get enough, nutrition in order to repair itself. And that can absolutely lead to certain injuries, can lead to getting sick more often, getting more illness, all kinds of things.
Right. Okay. So we're starting to get a couple questions here. So let's get into the Q&A. I'm going to leave this slide up. So for everyone that's looking here right now, if you have any questions for Jill, we're going to start to transition into the Q&A right now. Here's our contact information. Before we get into that, what are ways that you could potentially help people on here if they're like, hey, I have questions about that. I would love to talk to you individually. What type of things do you offer, just so they know before we get into the Q&A if they need to take off here in a few minutes? Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
There we go.
I was on mute there for a second. Yeah, they can absolutely reach out. I do individual nutrition coaching. Again, if it's just fueling for performance, fueling for their activity level, if they do find that they kind of struggle more with some of these food rules, this chronic dieting, chronic underfueling because they're afraid of weight gain, or they're afraid of, if I start eating these foods, I'll never stop. That's a common fear. So kind of breaking through a lot of that diet culture mentality, breaking through a lot of those myths and helping them to actually figure out how to fuel your body appropriately. Because again, people are often surprised at how much it actually takes and how much the body truly needs, especially if we are active individuals. So my website, you can reach out, jillmerkelrd.com. I'm most active on Instagram of the social medias at jillmerkelrd. And then you'll also see on my website, there's a link to my blog where I have a lot of articles around nutrition, sports nutrition, running specific, general nutrition, all kinds of good stuff to get started that way as well.
Okay, awesome. I definitely recommend people reaching out. I mean, she's been a great resource to me over the years. And this is an area that most people, I feel like I see a lot of runners there. They always come to me for different things, either injuries or strength training. And this is the foundation underneath it all. So definitely recommend looking into this and making a priority in 2021. So Dawn asks, how accurate is the calories burned calculation that is given for workout? So if you're using a Garmin, for example, do you any research on that? If those are actually accurate to properly calculating what you're burning?
Yeah, there's definitely some margin of error, both with calculating how much we're burning, and then especially with, like if you're tracking your intake, like using MyFitnessPal or using some other app or tracking method, there's quite a bit of error in that as well. Not just in, what the foods actually have in them, but then being realistic about what portion size did you have. A lot of times we're just estimating, like maybe I had this amount, and so we're putting that in. And then also how the foods, kind of break down. So I feel like tracking, those things can be beneficial sometimes in the short term, but in the long term, especially tracking like your nutrition and your calories and your macros, I feel like we can get very focused on the wrong thing, and we can get very kind of obsessed with it if we're, kind of a type A or, perfectionist type personality. So trying to move away from being quote unquote perfect, with our intake, and focusing more on quality and balance and how we feel.
Awesome. And so David asks, thoughts on intermittent fasting? I feel like it is beneficial for me, but is it due to just reducing my caloric intake, or is there a metabolic benefit as well?
Yeah, it's not something that I recommend in general, because it is another type of dieting, like a type of not listening to your body. Definitely, I do find, and the research has found, that it is more beneficial for men than women. As women, it can really throw off some of the hormones. It can lead to, again, those periods of restriction and then overeating. For men, it can also do that as well. But for some people, I do find that it has been helpful, if they are just trying to kind of modify a current habit. Like, it's not bad to eat at night, but if you find yourself just mindlessly snacking in front of the TV or something at night, and you are going over your actual physical nutrition needs, then having that kind of time cut off can be helpful. But I think it does become problematic if, you wake up hungry in the morning at like, normally you would eat maybe at 8 o'clock, but because you're intermittent fasting, you're not supposed to eat until 12. And so you're ignoring what the body actually needs. And then another piece on that is depending on when your workout is. So if you're trying to work out during the fasted time, you would want to make sure and try and time it so that you're still getting the recovery nutrition afterwards.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Beth asks, diabetes runs in the family. Is eating all the carbs and sugar going to encourage this if you don't burn them during a workout?
Yeah, so it definitely takes into account, nutrition takes into account individual health issues. So for instance, if someone does have diabetes or has a history of it, it's not, again, that we have to cut out all carbs. It's more looking at the quality of the carbs, maybe getting more carb-based foods that have more fiber, getting those carb-based foods paired with proteins, paired with fats, so that we're not just getting that up and down in blood sugar. Like if you were just eating, candy bars all day, it's like, woo, spike in blood sugar, crash in blood sugar. But if we're pairing, getting more fiber, getting more protein, getting more fat, it helps to level that out. And so it's again looking at basically the blood sugar and incorporating more of those food groups together.
Okay. And kind of along those lines, are there other question we had there? Are there other fuels that have less sugar in them for running longer distances? Like, are there certain things we need to look at on the ingredient list of those to fit certain people?
Again, it's going to be very individualized. There are a lot of products out there. And I guess the one thing, I would start with there is, why are we not wanting the sugar? Because essentially that's what we're looking for. That's the fuel source, the quickest fuel source to get into the muscles. And so any of the carb-based foods are going to be broken down into sugar, and that's how the body uses it. But they're certainly individualized, based on, again, what you can tolerate from a stomach standpoint. Sometimes you have to spread it out more rather than taking like a whole energy gel, at one time. Maybe you kind of spread it out over the course of like a half an hour, matching it with fluid intake so that it's not just sitting in your stomach causing GI issues. You actually want it to get into the muscles. And then there's certainly products that are digested slower, such as the Huma gels. They have the chia seeds, some of the other products where the carbohydrate source isn't digested as quickly as some of the more sugar-based ones. But again, then you would have to be strategic about maybe fueling earlier, because you do need time for it to get into, the muscles and be used as fuel.
Okay. So at a certain point, if you do that too late, it's almost like you're in a deficit for that period of time. So you actually catch up, and then maybe who knows if do you catch up at that point in terms of energy, or are you further in a deficit?
Yeah, it depends how far you're going. My motto is fuel early and often, because if you wait until you're gassed out and then you try and eat a gel, like it's kind of too late. You missed that opportunity to get enough fuel to, end the race strong. And so that's why we don't wait until 2 hours in to fuel. We start fueling around an hour while we still have some carbohydrates stored up. And then we keep ourselves from getting, to empty.
Okay. What are your thoughts on caffeinated hydration fuels?
Yeah, again, that's going to be very individualized. Big GI issue, if you're a normal caffeine drinker, you likely won't have any trouble with like caffeinated hydration or fueling sources. For myself, I don't drink a lot of caffeine, so I have to be really cautious. If I was going to suddenly take, like 6 gels that have a bunch of caffeine, that might not work out for me so well. And then also how we respond to caffeine. Again, if you're used to it, you might need a little bit more in order to actually give you like the mental boost. And then for other people, it actually has the opposite effect, where it doesn't give you a mental boost. Like for me, it makes me more tired. It's very weird. So kind of keeping that in mind as well. And then looking at the timing, like maybe you start out when you're still feeling fresh and strong, you don't have the caffeine. And then towards the end, you start to incorporate it for that extra boost.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Question here from Marlene. What about osteopenia? Any particular food to increase or decrease? And are the pie charts that you showed earlier applicable to all age groups?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to be more like nutrient specific, definitely making sure we're getting enough protein, getting enough total calories, getting, enough calcium, vitamin D, some of those nutrients that are really important for bone health. But the plates definitely can be used for all ages. It might, well, with any of the plates in any age, we're still going to look at specific foods. If someone's not consuming dairy products for whatever reason, then looking at other options to still get the protein, get the nutrients that you might be missing from not eating those specific foods.
And do older people require less calories?
Mm-hmm.
Does that change their caloric need change over time?
It does. I want to say it's like 100 calories per decade less. So it's not as dramatic as people think. It's not like, oh, I turned a year older and now I need like 1,000 calories less. It's like a slow decline. And a lot of that has to do with muscle mass, that we do lose muscle as we get older. And so we can help to kind of slow down that process by working out, by eating enough, getting enough protein, getting some of those muscle building nutrients to kind of help slow that decline.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like that. So Don asked, what should we as athletes target as a calorie goal? I know you're going to start with that specific again, correct?
Yes, I can't say. Yeah, it's so different for everyone because it takes into account age, gender, height, weight, activity level. But I would say in general, it's going to be more than you think that you need.
Because you typically see people that are more so missing or not consuming enough rather than overeating.
Yeah, absolutely. Or it's again that restrict binge cycle of I'm trying to eat too little, which eventually leads me to eating more. And that can happen over the span of like a week or a month, but it can even happen day to day where people aren't eating enough during the day and then they find themselves overeating at night. And so just kind of looking at current patterns, current habits of, okay, I find myself just really craving sweets every night, or I find myself every afternoon, like really raiding the pantry, looking for something to give me some energy. Those are usually signs we're not eating enough earlier in the day.
Okay. And if someone really wants to nail down how much they should be consuming in terms of calories, is there a good resource for them to figure that out, or how should they go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend working with a registered dietitian. There's certainly calculators and stuff online, but I just find that they're not personalized enough. Like even using MyFitnessPal, anytime I have a client using that, I'm like, I'm going to tell you what numbers we're shooting for. Don't listen to the ones that it's going to give you. Because again, it's insanely low. Like that 1,200 for females. If you put in that you're female and you want to lose weight, it like defaults to 1,200. And I'm like, that's way too low. So I would certainly recommend getting, some individualized recommendations. But in general, the Mifflin St. Jour, you can Google that, Mifflin St. Jour calculator, and that can give you a general idea of kind of baseline, how much you need just to stay alive, even if you're in bed all day, if you're on bed rest, like it'll give you the baseline of how many calories you need, and then show you the increases based on your activity level.
Awesome. And last question, because I know we need to get moving here and be respectful of your time. Food sensitivity testing. And any thoughts or info on that, or any people that maybe should consider that based on how they're reacting to certain foods or situations?
Yeah, so it's interesting because there's not a lot of research to support a lot of the food sensitivity testing. And there's a difference between food sensitivity and food allergy. And so like there is research to support like being tested for celiac disease or being tested for lactose intolerance. But when you go and get like blood work done and it gives you a printout of these foods, are red, green, yellow, they come up with, these foods to stay away from. There's not a lot of science to actually support that. And so it's more so individualized, looking at narrowing down if we can identify which foods or which food groups might be causing issues, and then doing more of an elimination diet where we cut out some of those foods temporarily and then start to introduce them back to, again, identify what the specific source is, rather than getting this printout and, here's 20 foods that I'm supposed to now cut out. A lot of times people just try and cut those out and they never realize what the actual source was. They never start to incorporate them back in.
Interesting. Okay. So we've usually always go over here with the information. We had tons of questions here that we got to the majority of them. So if anyone else is on right now, has additional questions, feel free to go to her website, call, shoot her a message, figure out a time. You can set up a consultation. I definitely recommend you can see from the answers here, and when it comes to nutrition, so many things need to be individualized to your needs. So it'd be great for her to understand kind of your history and what you're working towards in terms of goals. But Jill, I appreciate you once again taking time to join us on here. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week down in Nashville.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.